lies told to me, I had enough. All of the tricks and deceit, I had enough. Back up on off from me, I had enough. Label me as angry, I had enough. All the lies told to me, I had enough. All of the tricks and deceit, I had enough. Back up on off from me, I had enough. Label me as angry.
We have waged a fierce battle against the invisible enemy, the China virus, which has claimed countless lives in 188 countries.
What's up, YouTube family? It's your boy Big Ant checking in with you. Today's topic of discussion is Stop Asian Hate. So what's going on with Asian folks, y'all? The Asian community is having a lot of issues lately, and I wanted to unpack that with y'all and get your thought process on it. For me personally, it is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, as I've had a lot of history with the Asian community. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, more specifically Inglewood, California. So, Asian folks and Black folks have always cohabitated together, and we've always had our issues, but this looks like it's taking it to another level. So I kind of wanted to unpack it and get an understanding of where this is coming from based on your opinion, and I wanted to give my opinion, which is a strong opinion. So right now, we're seeing a lot of things go on in the media with random attacks of violence against Asian people. What's surprising is some of these attacks have come from African Americans. Now, traditionally, we have not really been folks that perpetrated hate crimes, so this is surprising for me to see. What do y'all think about that? Is that random? Is that staged? Is that actually real? Has our relationship between the Black and Asian community gotten that bad? What's going on here? I'll tell you, race relations for Asian folks in America, they've had a rocky road to start. I don't think that they've had a road that really could be compared to what African Americans have been through, but they've had a history of violence and oppression perpetrated against them, especially by the U.S. government. Now, we all know after World War II, after the Pearl Harbor attacks, that a whole bunch of Japanese folks were rounded up into concentration camps. But interesting enough, America apologized for that. They actually received reparations for that. To date, I don't think that any African Americans have received our 40 acres and a mule for the violence and oppression that's been perpetrated against us. But that's a whole nother topic. That's not anything that's Asian folks' fault, but I thought that was something really interesting to touch on when we're discussing race relations with Asian Americans in American history. Right now, it really appears that Asian folks really are starting to feel oppressed. I was really surprised by that outlook by the Asian community. And I don't want to make light of what they're going through now as an African American, because I've been through that 10 times over. So nobody wants to make light of the things that they're going through, but it's really interesting how the time that they've gone through it and the level that they've gone through it, they already feel oppressed. Most folks look at African Americans' perception of oppression as a joke. Over 300 years of rape, murder, and torture and oppression, segregation, voter oppression, and racism is a joke for most when we broach that subject. But Asian Americans who have had not even half of that time in America, and not even half of that time of oppression, or not even half of that time of the devastation of their race and their people, are feeling the oppression that we feel. That's interesting. I want to unpack that. Many of you know, in my experiences, I grew up in Los Angeles. I was an 80s baby. I'm not going to give y'all my age. I'm an old man by most standards, but I grew up in the 80s when race relations between African Americans and Asians was at a all-time bad high. There was a lot of disrespect going on in the community between Asians and Black folks. I think definitely a lot of it had to do with Asian Americans that own businesses in the Black community, which forced us to actually interact with each other, and that interaction wasn't good at the time. It actually reached a head when there started to be violence between our communities. I think many of you know about Natasha Harding, young lady who was shot dead in a store over a bottle of orange juice back in late 80s, early 90s in Los Angeles. Um, at that time, our relations had really gotten bad. And then when we had the LA riots, violence definitely was pointed towards the Asian community and Asian businesses. Asian businesses were burned to the ground. Where I talk about how this is near and dear to my heart, at that time, I actually worked at an Asian liquor store. I was 10 years old, and it was the first real job I had. I worked at a liquor store that was located in our community, and the owners decided that they would take another route. They hired young black kids from the community to come work for the store so that they were a part of the community and not ostracizing the community, which was an interesting take. And it was so interesting that when the riots actually happened, the first day of the riots, I'll never forget it. A bunch of us from the neighborhood went down to the store and we sat with the owners overnight. They didn't know whether or not their store was going to be burned to the ground because a lot of their family members, a lot of their colleagues' stores were just going up in smoke. But a lot of members of the community, we sat at the store overnight, and it was one of the only stores left standing in the morning. So I had that experience, working for Asian Americans, and I did that job, gosh, for over 3 years. It was the first real job I had, and yeah, I was 10 years old when I started working there. So that meant they were paying me under the table. They were paying me fairly, and they treated me fairly. They fed me every day. So I had a chance to see that, along with a lot of the bad things that went on between our communities. I think after the riots, I really felt that race relations between African Americans and Asian Americans started to die down some. Less violence, less hatred, less anger, less frustration. So when I started to see the things that are going on now, it brought a lot back for me. It brought up a lot of emotion and a lot of thoughts about what I experienced when I was a child. I think, I don't like bringing his name up, but we got to talk about the orange fella. When Donald Trump started pounding news media with blaming China for the coronavirus, uh, a lot of the folks that believe what he says, that listen to what he says, really took exception to the fact that China would be attacking America through a virus and begin to take that frustration out on the Asian community. I really feel, my personal opinion, and you can refute that if you like, but my personal opinion is that that's where a lot of this has started back up again. The China virus and the attacks on Asians coming here and transmitting the virus to Americans. This is what Donald Trump portrayed. And a lot of folks drank that Kool-Aid, which I think is BS, because that virus came from all over the world. Where it originated from, it may have originated in China. But we really don't know much about that virus. But I really believe that there's no coincidence that Donald Trump spent over a year in media pointing his finger at China, and all of a sudden, here we go again with violence perpetrated against Asian Americans. I remember I was in a gun store buying a gun. I'm an avid, gun collector. That's one of my hobbies, if you guys didn't know that. But I was in a gun store one day purchasing a gun, and this was right at the beginning of the scare or the rush for the pandemic. And everybody was in there buying guns, whatever they could get. I remember there was a young Asian lady in the store, and she was trying to buy a gun, and I had never seen, personally, the level of disrespect towards an Asian American that I saw that day. I mean, they treated that lady bad, and she was absolutely horrified, and I took exception to that, and That's where my feelings come from. I really think that a lot of what's going on now stems from that. Where I got thrown off is when I start to see the attacks from my people on Asian Americans. And I mean, we've seen some ugly stuff. I think there was a video last week of this brother out of the blue, young Asian lady walking down the street and just viciously attacks her. I think we saw an attack on a subway in New York where a young Asian man was beat up pretty bad. But we've seen a lot of that stuff go on. Where does that come from? You know, our people traditionally have been the ones that have had to deal with racial prejudice, that have had to deal with racial violence perpetrated against us. We're dealing with it now more than ever. So where does this come from, YouTube family, where our people are now perpetrating racial violence against other people when that's been our main fight? Is that real? You know, is that staged? Is that BS? Is that an attempt by some force within America to start to spark race riots amongst minorities? What's your thought on that? I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm also not a dummy. And you know, the proof is in the pudding. We've never had this type of relationship before, where our people feel compelled to go out and commit random acts of violence in a foolish and racial manner. So where is this coming from? I want to hear your thoughts on this. I want to hear what your thought is about the struggle with the Asian community now. Are they oppressed? Do they have the right to feel as oppressed as Black folks do? Is that even a fair comparison that I'm making? You know, is everybody oppressed who's felt oppression and can raise their hand and stand next to us and say, hey, I've been through what you've been through? Or do we have the right, because of the hell we've been through over the last 400 years, to say, wait a second. You haven't felt what I felt yet. You can still go get a job. You can still drive your car without being Black and worrying about a cop blowing your brains out or shooting you in your back or beating the hell out of you. I don't see a lot of that going on in the Asian community. So is our struggle the same? Is it similar? I want to hear that from you. You know, we in the years that I've been involved in the sneaker community, that I've been involved with hip hop culture, the Asian community has been right there next to us with those things. It seems like we've enjoyed a lot of the same things. You know, working in the sneaker community, the Asian community is really an integral part of the sneaker community. They're really, truthfully, an integral part of hip hop culture. Hip hop is just as popular overseas as it is here. Many artists go over to Asia to break their records, to make money. So if we enjoy the same things from a cultural perspective, if we live and cohabitate in the same communities, where is this coming from? I want to hear that from you guys. That's a lot to unpack. I know I've thrown a lot on you guys here, but I want to hear from you what your thoughts are on Asian hate right now. Where does it stem from? Who's the culprit? What do we do to stop it? Remember, all opinions are respected as long as you're respectful. Comment, like, and subscribe. Share your opinions below. They are important to me and I value that. Let's get into this discussion, y'all. Peace.
I had enough. All the lies told to me. I had enough. All of the tricks and deceit. I had enough. Back up on off of me. I had enough. Label me as angry. I had enough. All the lies told to me. I had enough. All of the tricks and deceit. I had enough. Back up on off of me. I had enough. Label me as angry.